It has been 49 months since the first positive COVID-19 case was reported in Namibia. Welcome to Business 7, where in tonight's program we will be focusing on the past 2 years. But first, let's take a look at the printed version of Business 7 and what you can read in that today. And of course, you will find it in Allgemeine Zeitung, Republikein, and Namibian Sun. Our lead article on the front page is indeed taking stock of COVID-19, where we look at the impact of the pandemic on the Namibian economy over the past 2 years. On page 3, we look at the Namibia Statistics Agency's first business census, where they looked especially at smaller businesses, also within the period of the pandemic, how many businesses opened and how many closed and what their revenue levels were. Then, of course, we have, as usual, our infographic, and that is a snapshot of the economy of last year based on the provisional national account figures by the Namibia Statistics Agency. On page 5, you can read all about multinationals and tax avoidance in Africa, that article from The Conversation. And then also on page 7, we look at board of directors and how they should be doing business in the new order. We hope you enjoy the printed version.
Connection. It's in the human touch, the feeling of belonging. It inspires us and empowers us, creates clarity from complexity. It starts new conversations, unlocks the power of advice, and makes an impact on your life. At Alex Forbes, we pioneer insight to provide you with advice that connects your decisions of today to your impact tomorrow.
What is the difference between the Namibian economy of March 2020 and the Namibian economy of March 2022? We asked Theo Klein, the economist at Simone Storm, for his take. Hello, Theo Klein, economist of Simone Storm. Theo, welcome once again to the studio. Your dedication to this program is rather unmatched, especially seeing that you are talking to us while you are at home with COVID.
Yes, hi, Jeremy. Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, I think it's funny that it has to happen now for the first time since the pandemic outbreak, but rather this more mild variant than Delta. So I count myself lucky, at least.
Theo, it's just about 2 years since the first case of COVID-19 was reported in Namibia. How does the Namibia of 2020 compare to the Namibia of 2022?
There are quite a lot of similarities, Jeremy. I think, especially with regards to our dire economy, that is still not in a good space. So I do think that in that regard, we are fairly similar to 2020. However, it has been the first time our democratic government has handled a pandemic. And I think obviously quite a few mistakes have been made, but it seems as if we are willing to learn from them and try and shape a new strategy for future pandemics that should come our way. So I think that at least makes me hopeful. But we have a lot more jobs that need to be created than ever before, especially compared to 2020. I think the challenges are ever greater. We are sitting with a new world order where a lot of fears of social unrest with regards to the COVID policies are looming. Inflation is rife all over the world. And I think so for Namibia, we find ourselves in a very challenging position with a lot more jobs than we have to create if we are to really improve things in our society, to avoid social unrest. So 2 years after every epidemic, we have seen social unrest in countries that had virus outbreaks. So it remains to be seen whether Namibia can successfully avoid so major social unrest locally. It remains to be seen.
The verdict is still out.
Yeah.
Theo, what are the major scars left on Namibia by COVID?
I think for those who have lost their jobs as a result of the lockdown and our borders being closed, I think the scars are still very much fresh or alive. And especially if we look at sectors such as the tourism industry, we also know of a lot of small and medium-sized manufacturers that have closed as a result of the lockdown. So I think for them, the scars are still very much alive. I don't know how those families are coping financially, because we are sitting with very high food and fuel prices, rising interest rates. And if they've not been able to replace their lost jobs, then of course they are sitting in a very difficult financial position at the moment. I think also we are social beings, and I've said it many times before, we are not supposed to be locked away and kept isolated from one another. So I think for those who have developed mental health disorders as a result of the lockdown, for them, the scars are also still very much fresh. And I think that obviously has impacts on our economy because it impacts labor productivity. And for those who have lost all sense of hope and all sense of purpose, that can also filter through to the economy in the form of them not trying to even find a new job. So then they become what we economists call discouraged work seekers. And then you need a welfare systems where government then, has unemployment benefits to sort of keep them alive or keep them going. And that's also a problem. And I think it's just overall, if you have mental health disorders, it does affect your productivity. No matter in which sector you operate. So I think there are those social issues that we also still sit with, and that obviously needs to be addressed. And I'm hoping that obviously that will also shape our strategy of how we tackle future pandemics.
Theo, I just want to elaborate on this point in particular around the mental health of Namibia and its labor force nearly post-pandemic. It's very difficult to really get the entire picture because we don't really have data, and there's a lot of red tape getting that data. But in your experience, you have spoken to experts. How bad is it?
I would say, look, without the data, it's still difficult to say, but the responses I've received, Jeremy, say that it is significant. So I've spoken to both psychiatric or health practitioners in both private and public sectors. And they indicate that the problem has gotten significantly worse. It's not just with regards to mental health disorders, where the most common one was depression, which they've seen a significant increase of, also suicide, but then it's also social issues such as drug and alcohol abuse. So I guess that maybe also supports why government put restrictions in place in terms of alcohol sales since the pandemic outbreak, but it remains a big problem. And I think also now with food and fuel prices having increased significantly, overall inflation is much higher. I think for those households, it becomes a bigger problem because if you have more and more money going towards alcohol and drugs, maybe the father or the mother that's abusing it, then of course there's ever less money available for basic necessities. So I think those households will have will see a much bigger or more negative socioeconomic situation for themselves. And then I think with regards to the mental health, I know that when I spoke to public healthcare workers, they just said that there's no more capacity in the public healthcare space for more patients. So now they are in a situation where certain citizens are in need of being admitted to certain psychiatric healthcare facilities, but there's not enough space for them. And of course, they can't afford the private facilities. So so that's actually a much bigger problem within the public sector space. And it remains concerning that there are a lot of Namibians across the country that are not receiving the necessary mental health care that they should be receiving. And this problem, Jo Marie, I understand, is not just focused on certain big urban sectors or centers such as Windhoek and Swakop. It is across the country as well, especially in the north. There is also seemingly a big problem with regards to this as well.
While Namibia and its cities are seen as one of the cleanest countries in Africa, plastic pollution is a big problem. Therefore, it's up to each of us to do what we can to reduce the use of plastic, especially single-use plastic bags. At Liberty Life Namibia, we've taken the decision to turn all our old branding items into reusable shopping bags. It's a way in which we can drive sustainability and look after our most important stakeholder, our environment. If you also believe in sustainability and would like more information, please get in touch. Liberty Life Namibia. In it with you.
So what will it take for the Namibian economy to recover from COVID-19? And 2 years after the fact, should we have approached the pandemic differently? Once again, we have Theo Klein, the economist at Simone Storm. Theo, what is needed for Namibia to heal, number one? And number two, how long is it going to take?
I think the second question is a bit harder to answer, Jo Marie, but let me start with the first one. We have been saying for many, many years that government needs to create a pro-business environment if it really is serious about seeing a private sector-led economic growth and recovery. We need government to properly hand over the economy to the private sector in the sense that we should not see government operate in certain sectors. For example, government should not necessarily be running petrol stations. They should not necessarily be running bread and bake breakfasts and hotels and lodges. So there are certain sectors in which we could probably, or we would advise government to rather really hand over to the private sector and let them service the economy or any customers in certain markets. I think we need to see that. We need government to deregulate in certain industries. Certain regulations are just inhibiting growth. It is making doing business on a daily basis very difficult or challenging. Just one small example that I can use is that flower shops in Namibia need to apply for an import license once every week. So they cannot order roses and other flowers from Kenya and South Africa before they apply for this license once every week. And that obviously creates a lot of paperwork, a lot of admin, and then less focus that can go into other areas of their flower shop business. So that's just a very small example, but it starts with those small regulations that government needs to remove or see how they can change just to make the ease of doing business a lot easier on a daily basis. And then I think also, Jo Marie, we do need to see better cohesion and better cooperation between central government and regional government. A lot of times we see a lot of good ideas good policy suggestions or changes coming out from central government here in Windhoek. But then when it comes to the actual implementation thereof on the where these policy changes needs to be implemented on the ground to really impact the economy, that's where regional government then comes into play, and they're not on the same page as central government. So I think there is a misalignment in terms of objectives and just being on the same page when it comes to central and regional government. And a lot of times, unfortunately, Germany, it is a regional government that causes inefficiencies that maybe deter foreign investors from setting up shop in Namibia, and that needs to be addressed. And then, of course, I think Germany, with regards to the pandemic, mistakes have been made. Was our lockdown implemented too early? Definitely, if you look at the data. But this is not just in hindsight. I remember very well that while I was sitting at home during our hard lockdown, I did think to myself, this lockdown is way too early, because at that time we only had about one or two, less than a handful of cases in the whole country. Why did we then put the lockdown in place? We should have rather waited for winter. That I can say in hindsight. Because obviously in winter, you always see a clear upward trend in cases. So I think we need to learn from our mistakes. We need to let the data speak for itself and drive our decisions. We cannot just copy and paste COVID response policies from other countries and implement it in Namibia. We need to have our own unique set of policies that we put in place based on the data that we gather ourselves. And there I must commend government. They've been doing a very good job with regards to collecting data. But I think we now need to get to that point where we use that data to drive our decision-making process. And in that way, hopefully, we can learn from the mistakes that we've made with the COVID-19 pandemic and then treat future pandemics a whole lot better. In that way, I then hope that we somehow limit or contain the job losses that could take place because lockdowns just don't seem to really work. And if we look at other countries as case study examples, we see countries who've never had a lockdown recording less deaths than countries who had very strict lockdowns with severe economic consequences. So to some extent, I really also do question whether a lockdown is the way we should be going. So I hope that all of this will really drive our approach in future. And then I think what gives me hope, Germany, is that we are hearing more and more from certain government officials that they need to address the the ease of doing business in our country. They are consulting more and more industries to ask them, what challenges are you facing? What makes life difficult for you? And what can we do to make it better or easier? So certain officials in Ministry of Finance and Bank of Namibia are starting with this, or they've already been doing this for the last couple of months. So I think that gives me hope that things can really change going forward.
Yeah, thank you very, very much for your insights. Once again, we have taken up quite enough of your bed rest. We wish you a speedy recovery.
Thank you, Jean-Marie.
Connection. It's in the human touch, the feeling of belonging. It inspires us and empowers us, creates clarity from complexity. It starts new conversations, unlocks the power of advice, and makes an impact on your life. At Alex Forbes, we pioneer insight to provide you with advice that connects your decisions of today to your impact tomorrow.
This is the nominal GDP of Namibia in 2021. Of course, a nominal GDP or a GDP at current prices shows the impact of inflation. So it's quite normal that a nominal GDP increases as the years go by. One can clearly see the impact of the pandemic in 2020 there, where the nominal GDP in fact decreased and then slightly rebounded in 2021. Let's look at Namibia's GDP. It's a real GDP at constant prices. Of course, this is where inflation is taken into consideration, so that basically you can compare apples with apples. We see a slight recovery in the economy last year from 2020, which was the COVID year, and there we can see the massive contraction from 2019. That, of course, was a historic contraction of about 8%, and then a slight recovery in 2021. It's interesting to note that the real GDP of 2021 is basically on par of that of 2013. Our next slide deals with gross fixed capital formation, or as it's known in layman's term, investment in the country. Now, of course, that has been on a very sharp declining trend, and economists have warned about Namibia's investment climate and uncertainty in terms of policy impacting on those figures. The next slide breaks down the public sector versus the private sector when it comes to investment in the country, and one can see the impact of policy uncertainty on the private sector deciding to do business in Namibia. Let's take a look at the sectors. That's construction's contribution to the GDP last year. That is in current prices, nominal figures being used there. We can see construction having an extremely hard time since 2016. Our next slide deals with mining. Slight uptick there last year, of course, the impact of uranium felt there. Slight recovery in tourism last year, of course, that comes off the massive contraction in 2020 with the lockdowns and the global pandemic. Interesting once again to note that last year's figures is basically where tourism was in 2015.
While Namibia and its cities are seen as one of the cleanest countries in Africa, plastic pollution is a big problem. Therefore, it's up to each of us to do what we can to reduce the use of plastic, especially single-use plastic bags. At Liberty Life Namibia, we've taken the decision to turn all our old branding items into reusable shopping bags. It's a way in which we can drive sustainability and look after our most important stakeholder, our environment. If you also believe in sustainability and would like more information, please get in touch. Liberty Life Namibia. In it with you.
Thank you very much for joining Business 7. We hope you found the program insightful, as we really focused on COVID in this program. We're playing out with a video on vaccines in Africa. That's it for this week. We'll see you next week, the same time. Take care.
Africa vaccinating Africa. It is necessary and it is achievable. Bonjour.
Madame la Directrice Générale.
Enchanté, Dr.
The funding we get from actually the IMF has been extremely critical in our project of making vaccine available in Africa. This has been used by the government to support our project for vaccine manufacturing called Madiba. Our platform is targeting to make 300 million vaccine doses a year. First would be dedicated fully to COVID and will be over time translated to other vaccines.
I am very impressed by the visit. I am very proud that we at the International Monetary Fund are providing support to the country. Small part of the special drawing rights that we have allocated to Senegal will go for this rapid expansion of vaccine production.
Le Sénégal, à l'instar des autres pays, a reçu sa quote-part de DTS qui tourne autour de 246 milliards de francs CFA. Une bonne partie de ce montant donc, de DTS nous a permis justement donc, de réhabiliter une bonne partie donc, de nos infrastructures sanitaires.
Most of that funding would go actually to support the infrastructure building. We are first to build a facility, but at the same time, we will later transfer the technology, recruit people, and make sure from the regulatory perspective we are on the right track. The fact that we are making vaccine in Africa would build the trust that we need now with the community so they can get vaccination rate increasing over time. Then you may prevent other variant emerging and being a threat to the rest of the world.